In the past 3 to 4 years, we have seen the cost of surrogate compensation double or even triple. Surrogacy agency fees have also increased by about 50%. And even the cost of creating embryos is much higher than before. There are a lot of fertility clinics these days, possibly the bulk of fertility clinics, which are owned by private equity firms. And they all have a goal in common, which is to increase profits for themselves and their shareholders, which means things like increasing prices. Between 2020 and 2025, IVF prices have risen 20 to 30%. For instance, if you paid around $12,000 to $15,000 per cycle in 2020, you might now be paying $15,000 to $20,000 for each IVF cycle. All of these changes have made the overall cost of surrogacy much more expensive. You're listening to Surrogacy Made Simple with Dr. Alyssa Small-Lane, your host. Welcome back to Surrogacy Made Simple. We are in season 2. I'm your host, Dr. Alyssa Small-Lane, OBGYN and mom through surrogacy. And season 2 is going to be fantastic. We're going to be talking about all the things. You know how they say you're not supposed to talk about things like politics and money in polite conversation or when you're talking to strangers? Sometimes you have to. And we're going to be doing that starting with this podcast episode right now. We're going to be talking about money because how can you have a conversation about surrogacy without addressing finances? Yeah? One of the things that is on the mind of every intended parent is how much is this going to cost? And no doubt this is something that is on your mind. Surrogacy is expensive and there's no way around that. You already know. But the other thing that you know is that it's really difficult to pin people down to a true cost for what surrogacy will be. People just throw out numbers. They say $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, or they tell you it depends. And your next question is, what does it depend on and how much will it cost for me? Because you need to know how to make your budget. And if you've been tracking surrogacy at all, if you've been talking to people, paying attention, you may have noticed a disturbing trend. And that disturbing trend is that prices are trending up. The cost of surrogacy now is way higher than it has ever been. There has just been a cost explosion, and it makes starting your family with surrogacy really difficult. To be able to come up with your financial plan and your budget and to understand how you're going to do this, you really need to know those hard numbers and how it all works out. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about surrogacy costs in 2025. Surrogacy journeys can sometimes be relatively inexpensive. In other cases, costs can go above and beyond $200,000. And you might be asking and wondering where most people fall. A typical cost of surrogacy in 2025 is going to be somewhere between $160,000 and $200,000. That also means that some people are going to be below and some people are going to be above that. And as more people seek surrogates, the overall cost has risen and is continuing to rise. I first started writing about the cost of surrogacy back in 2022 when I published our Ultimate Surrogacy Cost Guide, and the prices then were quite different. We've now updated it. You can download it exactly where you're listening now, and it is the 2025 Ultimate Surrogacy Cost Guide. Costing $200,000 or more was considered very expensive. Our own journey cost less than $80,000 for everything, including embryo creation and paying our surrogate. And while that was considered low cost, again, not typical even, in 2022, It's almost unheard of today unless you're using all your available tips and tricks. In the past few years, prices have really skyrocketed, and we're all paying significantly more than we used to. In 2025, spending around $200,000 is quite common, and that is something that you should be going into surrogacy anticipating and expecting. And if you're feeling some sticker shock right now, you're not alone. The surge in cost has made surrogacy much more expensive overall and unfortunately out of reach for some parents. But understanding the pricing can help you come up with a plan for how you're going to make surrogacy work for you. To understand the cost right now, it helps to know what is involved in a surrogacy journey. Here's a simple overview. And if you want something more detailed, if you want an easy checklist to follow, you can download our surrogacy step-by-step guide. And it's going to be linked right where you are listening. Surrogacy is a way to build your family, right? It's an option if you want to have a baby and can't carry a pregnancy yourself. And it's a process where another woman called a surrogate carries your baby. There are two types of surrogacy, and they have different steps and costs. You have traditional surrogacy, which involves placing a sperm, usually from an intended father, or it could be a donor. And that sperm is being placed into a surrogate's uterus with a procedure called an intrauterine insemination or artificial insemination. And in this case, the surrogate is using her own egg, so she is genetically related to the baby. The other type of surrogacy is known as gestational surrogacy, and that's a lot more common, especially nowadays. It is also the more expensive type because it uses IVF, so in vitro fertilization, to create an embryo using egg and sperm. So those can be from the intended parent or they can be from a donor. And then that created embryo is placed inside the surrogate's uterus in a procedure called an embryo transfer. And in this case, the surrogate is not genetically related to the baby. Gestational surrogacy is what our podcast is primarily about, so that's what we're going to be focusing on. And with gestational surrogacy, you might already know who your surrogate is, like if she's a friend or a family member, or you might meet a surrogate for the first time through an agency or a matching service or by networking on your own. It's important to know that surrogacy is legal in most states across the US, and it does involve legal steps, lawyers, and sometimes court orders. This means then that you're going to need a lawyer to draft contracts and in some cases go to court to make sure that your parentage is clear. Once your surrogate is pregnant, she's going to be cared for by an OBGYN and she'll give birth in a hospital. After your baby is born, then you bring your child home and you start your journey as a parent. Now, here are some of the key people and services that you work with in a gestational surrogacy journey. You have your surrogate, you have your surrogacy agency if you choose to use one. You have your IVF clinic and your fertility doctor, an OBGYN or midwife. You have health insurance providers, and you have your lawyers and possibly the court system. So there's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of moving parts, right? And that's because gestational surrogacy is a well-organized process. It involves high-tech fertility treatments, a surrogate carrying your baby, legal contracts, a team of experts to guide and protect everyone involved. But each of those touch points, each of those professionals, all come with an associated cost. And you, as the intended parent, are responsible for covering the cost of all of that support and care. And this isn't new. This framework, this organization didn't just come about this year. This is the way that surrogacy has been done in the US for years upon years. So the question is, why has it gotten so expensive in 2025? Here's why. In the past 3 to 4 years, we have seen the cost of surrogate compensation double or even triple in some cases. Surrogacy agency fees have also increased by about 50%. And even the cost of creating embryos is much higher than before. All of these changes have made the overall cost of surrogacy much more expensive. Why is this happening? The factors that lead to rising surrogate cost started about 5 years ago and have grown stronger over time. It seems like the surrogacy industry itself actually has had a big role to play in this increase. And there are three main factors going on here. Number one is the rising demand for surrogates. And that's for a number of reasons. Part of it is delayed parenting. As more people are starting their families later because of career goals or other personal reasons, they are facing more difficulty in having children because of infertility, which also means that more people are pursuing things like surrogacy. Also, we have an expanding definition of family. So, more individuals, same sex couples, single parents are able to access things like IVF and surrogacy on their pathway to become parents. This is something that has become more common, accepted, celebrated, and embraced. And then, number two, we have the focus on US based surrogacy. And that's because of closure of some international options. There have been political issues and changing regulations that have led to the near closure of surrogacy in places like the Ukraine, although that's still a little bit in flux. And then there's uncertainty in places like the country of Georgia. Contrast that with what's going on in the US. In general, things are a lot safer and more reliable. There is a legal framework here in the US that protects both the surrogate as well as you. So many intended parents, not only from the US, but around the world, prefer to come to the US because of those legal protections and the secure framework. And then number three is a difficulty in recruiting surrogates. Only about 1 in 20 or so potential surrogates even pass the initial screen by an agency. So it's not easy, and not just anyone can become a surrogate. And then in the time after the pandemic, a lot of potential surrogates kind of changed their minds. They changed their priorities. They're focusing on their families, their own well being, and agencies had fewer applications. So, to keep up with the demand from all of these intended parents who are hoping to grow their families and to stay competitive, agencies have to spend more money, more time, more resources on recruiting surrogates. And to do that, one of their big ways is to offer higher and higher compensation to attract them. And that extra cost of higher compensation that an agency is advertising gets passed on to you as the parent. So all of these factors come together, help us to understand why we've seen these costs increase so much. The other thing that we have to look at is where exactly your money is going. And this is where things are a little bit interesting, because did you know that 73% of your surrogacy costs come from just 3 items? And if you add in the fourth item, then you're accounting for 85% of the total costs. So when we see the cost of those 3 items increase, it has a huge impact of your overall surrogacy journey. And those four major expenses are going to be surrogate compensation, agency fees, healthcare and insurance, and IVF and embryo creation. Looking at your major expenses, number one, you have surrogate compensation. These days, average compensation starting for a first-time surrogate is $60,000. And this is going to be paid directly to your surrogate to cover her time, effort, and physical demands of the process. And compensation also varies based off of a surrogate's experience. So a surrogate that has done it before, an experienced surrogate, usually receives a higher compensation, and that can be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 more. Some agencies also promote that certain surrogates in certain states should also receive a higher compensation, so that's something to look out for. Number two, you have agency fees. So the average agency fee today is $30,327. And yes, I know that's a very specific number, and that's because we have been tracking the price of over a dozen agencies for the past 5 years, and currently they are averaging at $30,327 for their agency fee. And this is being paid to the agency for their work that they are doing in terms of matching you with a surrogate, handling paperwork, guiding you through the legal process, and really just being your project manager for the entire surrogacy journey. Next, we have healthcare and insurance. This is averaging about $28,000. So, this is everything from deductibles, insurance premiums, the price that you're going to be paying to her OBGYN, the hospital, life insurance, disability insurance, a whole category of healthcare and insurances. Number 4 is going to be IVF and embryo creation. Yes, this is part of healthcare, but I separate this out. This is going to your fertility doctor and the fertility center. Average cost is about $17,250 per cycle today. And this is covering your IVF treatment used to create the embryo that's being transferred to the surrogate. Altogether, just these 4 major costs add up to over $100,000 if you're doing the math with me. And while this covers most of the surrogacy expenses, it's not all. There are many other smaller fees that can also add up. These are all things that are listed in your ultimate surrogacy guide, but just to breeze through them, it's things like gestational carrier preparation, legal contracts and parentage orders, court filing, escrow services, early pregnancy monitoring, egg donor expenses, travel costs, surrogate loss wages, embryo shipping and storage, NICU care, and you'll see it all laid out for you in that PDF guide. Our 2025 Surrogacy Cost Guide is available exclusively on our Bloombridge Surrogacy app, but it is free to use and be able to download there. And as I said, you will be able to find it on the link where you're listening right now. The app also includes an interactive surrogacy cost calculator, which has been totally updated to 2025. That way, you can actually enter the real numbers that you're being given from your estimates from agencies and clinics to get a better idea of what the cost of your journey is going to be. A question that comes up, and sometimes I see being thrown around, is that the high cost of surrogacy is due to inflation. You may be wondering if that is actually the case. And the answer is no. The rising cost of surrogacy isn't just about inflation. It's more expensive now than it was before the pandemic, but surrogacy costs have grown much faster than the general price increases. In other words, there are other reasons for the spike in cost of surrogacy, and unfortunately, the industry itself is playing a big part in it. So let's look at surrogate compensation. In 2019 or 2020, a first-time surrogate's base pay was about $30,000. That was average. So it was possible to have a surrogate carry for you for $25,000, and that was still seen as fair compensation. Could you imagine that today? Probably not, because today in 2025, first-time surrogates for between $55,000 and $65,000. Nearly 100% increase in just 5 years. Some advertisements even show a base compensation as high as $100,000. Wow. And then for agency fees, agencies have to spend more on advertising and recruiting surrogates, yes, because of the rising demand. There aren't a lot of available surrogates. There aren't a lot of women who qualify and who are willing. So as a result, agencies have also increased their prices, but by a lot, 50% in the past 5 years, from around $19,633 in 2020 to approximately $30,327 today. So it's a lot more expensive. And then healthcare and insurance. Healthcare costs are higher today across the board, not specifically related to surrogacy. And that includes things like monthly insurance premiums, getting your insurance through the ACA, so Affordable Care Act. Those monthly premiums that we are seeing now are quite a bit higher than they were several years ago. But the other thing is, unfortunately, that more insurance plans now than ever before have exclusions and lien policies that make it more expensive to cover your surrogate. And if you're sitting there wondering, Alyssa, what is a lien policy? Don't worry, we got you. We sat down with an insurance expert, Sarah Page from Art Risk Financial, and she broke down what a lien is, what surrogacy-friendly insurance is, what to look for in a good policy, and which states are better than others in terms of being able to find insurance coverage for your surrogate. I'll link that episode. That way you can learn about lien policies, which are important because liens can seriously affect your surrogacy journey. A lien policy alone can add an extra $20,000 to $30,000 to your budget. And there are things that you can do at the beginning of your surrogacy journey to avoid having to spend that extra $30,000. What would your surrogacy journey be like if it was $30,000 less? That's money that you could be spending on an agency. That's money that you could be spending on the higher surrogate compensation. That's money you could be spending on your child instead of just bringing your child into this world. And the next thing that have gone up is IVF costs. And I have my suspicions as to why, and I'm just going to put it out there. I think a lot of it has to do with the influence of outside interest in medicine, particularly in the fertility space. And I'm talking about things like private equity. There are a lot of fertility clinics these days, possibly the bulk of fertility clinics, which are owned by private equity firms. And they all have a goal in common, which is to increase profits for themselves and their shareholders, which means things like increasing prices. Between 2020 and 2025, IVF prices have risen 20 to 30%. For instance, if you paid around $12,000 to $15,000 per cycle in 2020, you might now be paying $15,000 to $20,000 for each IVF cycle. So together, these factors help to explain why surrogacy has become so expensive. Right now, you might be thinking, dang, Alyssa, this is a lot of doom and gloom. And it is, I'm sorry. So, facing down this enormous price of surrogacy can be extremely overwhelming because most of us don't have a spare $200,000 laying around. But when you know what you're up against, then you can start to think about ways that you can save for your journey, or you can think about doing things a little bit differently. We have a lot of resources in Bloomberg and at Junie to help you with planning out your surrogacy budget and going through some of the different tips for how to make surrogacy a little bit more affordable. I did want to go through some of the questions that people have. These are questions that I get when I meet one-on-one with strategy sessions for our private clients or doing our case management, and also some questions that I see is floating around online. But let's go through them now. That way you don't have to be asking and you can learn from everybody else. Number one, why is there a huge price range? Yeah. Why did I pay $80,000, but some people pay $200,000 or $300,000 for surrogacy? The cost of surrogacy can vary a lot because every journey is unique. Nobody is coming to surrogacy with the exact same story. And as we just went through, there's a lot of different variables and moving parts, each which have their own price tag. So depending on the services that you choose to use and that you need, your prices will be different. So for example, the cost of IVF embryo creation can be higher if you need a more expensive medication protocol, or if you choose a fertility clinic that's very expensive. On the other hand, your fertility expenses may be really low because some states require insurance companies to cover certain fertility services. So if you live in one of those mandated states, the cost of creating embryos might be fully covered. Similarly, you may choose one of the surrogacy agencies who has a fee of $60,000, not to the surrogate, to the agency itself. And somebody else may choose to not use a surrogacy agency at all and have an independent journey. And that alone is a $60,000 difference in the price of their surrogacy. So these are some of the reasons why there's such a big price range. So speaking of independent surrogacy, that's actually the next question. What is the cost of surrogacy in 2025 without agency help? So without using an agency, the cost of surrogacy is about 130,000 to 170,000. That's because you simply just subtract the agency fees from the total costs. But all of the other expenses still apply and they're about the same. So that gives you a pretty good estimate. Can I get financing for surrogacy? Yeah, so that is an awesome question. And the answer is yes, there is financing available. There's loans, there's grants, and they can help you to pay for things like medical expenses. And there are some that will even cover the entire cost of surrogacy. One of those amazing grants is from the Gift of Surrogacy Foundation. We had one of the founders, Alexandra French, on the podcast to tell us about her journey as well as her foundation. And she reached out to me not too long ago to let me know that one of the award recipients this past cycle was a listener on Surrogacy Made Simple podcast. One of you listening right now heard us talking about the grant and you were able to apply and get the cost of surrogacy paid. Amazing. Okay, next is how much does surrogacy cost with a friend? If a friend acts as your surrogate, costs can be as low as $70,000. So my estimated range for that right now is between $70,000 and $110,000. And you're probably thinking, wow, that sounds a lot more doable than $200,000. Maybe I can do that. And hopefully that's something that works out for you. But I should point out that there are two assumptions in those numbers, and they're pretty big assumptions. Number one is that you are doing independent surrogacy, so surrogacy without an agency. And not everybody who works with a friend or a family member chooses to manage their surrogacy by themselves. They may come and work with me to be their case manager, or they may hire an agency to coordinate their surrogacy journey. And then there's also the second assumption, which is that your friend is not asking for compensation. And it isn't always the case. So sometimes friends are still compensated, but usually it's less than what a professional surrogate might ask. Next question. Do intended parents pay more if more than one embryo transfer is needed? And the answer is yes, in general. Each transfer means that you have to pay your fertility center again. That's number one. And then number two, buy new medications. Number three, cover your surrogate's travel costs to the center. And number four, pay her a fee for the procedure, which is usually somewhere between $750 and $1,500. However, some fertility clinics and agencies have these sort of guaranteed programs where you're able to do multiple embryo transfers for one set price. Generally, that one set price is more than what the cost of a single embryo transfer can be. So you'll have to decide if that's something that makes sense for you. But in those instances, it does not cost you more to do multiple embryo transfers. Next question is whether or not surrogacy is cheaper than IVF. And the answer is no. Surrogacy is definitely more expensive than IVF because you have to go through the IVF process, and then you also have the added cost of a surrogate, legal fees, contracts, and all the other services that you wouldn't normally have to pay for with IVF alone going into your body. Is surrogacy covered by insurance? Most insurance plans don't fully cover the cost of surrogacy. There are some health insurance plans who may cover parts of the process, like the embryo creation or medications or embryo transfer, but other costs like surrogate compensation, lost wages, agency fees usually aren't covered. So the cost of surrogacy in 2025 is driven by many factors, not just by regular inflation, and the surrogacy industry as a whole does have some responsibility for the price that it is right now. Higher surrogate costs for compensation, increased agency fees, rising healthcare insurance prices, and more expensive IVF treatments have all added to the overall expense. But here are a few takeaways as we kind of wrap our minds around the cost of surrogacy. Surrogacy is unique. Each journey is unique, and every journey is different, so the costs vary a lot. There are main expenses, and those are the ones that you really need to focus on. Most of your money is going towards just a couple places. So surrogate pay, agency fees, healthcare, and embryo creation. And then there are other costs that you should keep in mind. Things like legal contracts, travel, extra medical treatments, because those little pieces can add up. And then plan ahead. It's important to understand all of these components so that you can plan and budget for your surrogacy journey. By knowing what to expect and using tools like our cost guide and interactive calculator, you can make a more informed decision and be better prepared for the adventure ahead. If you have more questions or need help with your planning, remember that you're not alone on this journey. We're here with resources to help you make surrogacy simple, supported, and successful.